So I'm guessing we're about ready to start. Thank you for showing up. My name is Jacob, and I'm going to talk about JEB today. This is a rather small audience, so please interrupt with questions if you have any, and I'll try to answer them as we go along. If there's something that's unclear when I speak, if I do Danish-English versions of some words, please interrupt and ask the question. So short survey. How many here knows about JEB already? Have used it? Just about everyone. Cool. That makes this a lot easier. So I'm going to talk a bit about functional testing, especially about JEB, of course, kudos and some history, how JEB works. I'm going to try to show you some examples of integrating JEB with Ratpack, but I also have slides on Grails 2 and 3. Talk about browser supports and some tips and tricks on how to use it. A little bit about me. I've spent 4 years working in Groovy and Grails consultancy. Now I'm with the Lego group, and I'm also an external associate professor at the University of Southern Denmark, where I teach a Groovy and Grails course along with a couple of other ones. So testing in general. If we don't do testing, we'll end up solving the same box over and over. Nice, video doesn't work. So this is the pyramid of how testing generally works in the projects I've seen. We have a lot of unit tests, and they cover a lot of different grounds. But when it comes to the confidence of does our application actually work when we put together multiple parts, it's rather low. So that's where I like functional testing. Functional testing considers the entire application, so I have a high degree of confidence that if I have actually tested this in a browser, clicked around in it, things tend to work. The bad thing is, the speed of running functional tests is a little low. So, when we do functional testing, we consider pretty much this as a black box testing. We don't really want to know it. It's sort of a gray box because we can peek inside, we can actually interact with the application if we want to. So if any of you have seen testers do code, this is kind of my experience with it. It's a little brittle, just like functional testing has a tendency to be. Lucky, JEB solves a lot of this for us. So JEB history started back in 2009. Jerome already told you. It was Luke Daly that initialized the project. When Luke turned to the Ratpack project, he handed over the realm to Martin Edman. He's the current lead and extremely active on the mailing list. So JEB is built on top of WebDriver. WebDriver is a successor to the Selenium remote control testing framework. Selenium remote control used JavaScript to interact with the browser, whereas WebDriver uses native browser implementation. And with JEB, you can use either JUnit or Spark or Cucumber and some of these other things. So then you can ask yourself, why do we even want JEB? And why do we want to use JEB? Since WebDriver is heavily under development, it's an active project, well, it's also quite verbose, and I consider it very low levels, and I don't think it's a complete solution. What JEB gives us is this very easy syntax, jQuery-like selector, gives us all the power of WebDriver. We can even interact with WebDriver if we want this. Gives us a robustness in how we model our application and our test. We can use Groovy, which I hope everyone in here likes, and it integrates very well with build system, especially Gradle. So both Martin and Luke's are with Gradleware, so the Gradle support is of course imminent, and it does Maven too. And for documentation, the book of JEB, the JEB user manual, is really, really extensive and great. I'm admiring that project. So that leads us to this kind of stack. Another level of indirection is always possible. So we typically use Spark that interacts with JEB. JEB uses WebDriver that interacts with the browser, and that's how we communicate with the application. So how do we use JEB? JEB uses the navigator method. It's a $ with parentheses, typically with a CSS selector, an optional index and a range, and additional matchers and attribute matches for for extracting information. So a few samples. If we want to match all P elements, it's pretty much like we would have seen in jQuery. We could also select the first P element. We can opt for something with, which has a specific title, has a specific text, or a specific class. And it goes even better. So we can have regular expressions. We have a few methods that we can go handle on the text. Or we have the contains method if you just want something that's a UI element. That's one way to do it. The navigator returns a navigator object, and you can change those. So if you select the first div element, you can go for the parent of that. You can also have the previous element, the next element, siblings, and children. So you can do something like this. If you want to find a table that's inside a P element that has cell spacing 0, we can be fairly specific in how to extract elements from our DOM. If the WebDriver that you're using has CSS3 support, you can do something like this. So it's really easy to extract information. If we want to have the text or the tag, the title or classes, we can do that on the navigator element. So this is tested code from the sample application that I'll make available as soon as I'm done with the presentation. The internet's working now. On the elements that we extract, we can click on them, so we can do interactions. We can ask the DOM, is this in fact displayed? If some testers I work with really like to, I need to ensure that the logo is visible on the page. Well, we can do that with Jeb. There's no reason why we want a tester to do manual clicking just to verify that some items are visible. What I like to have testers do is consider more the UI and the UX, so that once they browse around, they get a feeling of, does this work in a way that's really sensible, not can I click a method? We can automate that, and we can make them not waste time on that. We can do with confirm and with alert in case we have JavaScript actions that ask us to do input. For sending input, we used the WebDriver send keys method, but we have a shorthand there. So you can use the WebDriver implementation of this directly, but we have shorthands. Same, we can use WebDriver logic to interact directly, but Jeb provides us with some nice closures, so we can do interact. So control click down, click some link, and then release the control keys. This is quite simple, and I like the readability from a point of view. You can simulate drag and drop, and we even have, because drag and drop is quite a common thing nowadays, in the interact closure, you can just say, well, drag and drop this element by an X and a Y factor of this much. This tends to become a little brittle because it also depends on how to do screen resolution. So tests using this typically have some specifics on the driver that you need to set the screen sizes in exactly this resolution and stuff. Well, I'll get back to how we can do that. When interacting with forms, if we have an input, then the form element makes it easy to do with property notation, and this just is a shortcut for, if you go have the form, find the exact element, and either set the value or get the value to what you want. So I prefer clearly this form because it makes it a lot easier to read. Let's make sure that whenever I write a test, my tester can actually code review my test to verify, yes, I am testing exactly what he specified. And that prevents me from having a tester write the test. Usually when that happens, I spend more time debugging the errors in the test script than debugging the errors in the application. Your testers is, of course, much more technical adept than those I have worked with. Some special variables that we have available, the title variable, so we get the title of the web page. You can interact with the browser from WebDriver and have the current URL and the current window. We have much more options available. You can upload files, download files. When it comes to download files, because the browser asks you where do you want to save it normally, this tends to become a little of a problem. I'll come back to how we can solve that, or at least circumvent that, because clicking on this native where do you save the file browser window is not supported by WebDriver. So we have to make a little loop on that. And I'll come back to how we interact with JavaScript. So let's start looking at a small standalone script. So let's try to automate going to a web search engine, search for a GREACH conference, click the first link, and hopefully end up on the right home page. So we could do something like this. So go to duckduckgo.com. In the input field, push in GREACH conference, type the enter key, wait for links to be displayed. I'll get back to how we do waiting, but this is one of the ways. So the search engine needs a little time to think, but it doesn't really reload the page, so it's some AJAX call. Once that is available, we can go find the results, take the first of these, and click that link. And then we'll be on a page that starts with GREACH. This actually works, so we need to include, of course, a few libraries using the grab annotation, but you can run this as a Groovy script with a little bit out of this. So I want to get to how do we structure JEP tests. So I have made a very small application. This is made in Ratpack, so it's about how do we do a to-do list. So I have a menu bar that has an about this application, and I can type in whatever I'm going to do. I'm going to give a JEP presentation, have some fun, sangria, and I'm going to do some networking. And it shows up there. I can complete an item, and I can delete an item. So there's plenty of stuff here to test. And sorry for my absolute lack of front-end skills. So what I would like to do is have a test scenario that said, go to this list of to-dos, create a new item, and just delete it again. So the next few slides I'm going to show you, don't do this at home. This is just to get you up and started. So this is okay to do. We extend JEP spec and put our Spark specification in here. I hope every one of you has seen Spark. If you haven't, you should definitely take a look at it. It's superior to JUnit. So the first specification says go to the index page. So I'll just go to / and verify that the title is to-do list. So nothing weird here. Now it starts to get a little clumsy, right? This doesn't read very well. So I select something from an ID, input something, select something from an ID again, click on it, wait for the countdown in the top goes to 4, and make sure that there is some item that has the text that we inputted up here, and then verify that there's nothing in the input field. We clean that out once we've submitted. Then I want to delete something, so with confirm, I select one of the buttons, the fourth one on my page, click on it, wait for the text to be gone, and make sure there's nothing that contains this anymore. What we see here is the way not to do it. So we have a lot of selecting going on. If I go back here, we'll see the new to-do is selected a few times, so really bad styling. And it doesn't read very well. This is where JEP comes in and solves this, because we don't want to have this much duplication. This ends up having a shitload of places where we'll have to correct in our test in case something works out. And we'll end up being like this dude. So what we should do is use pages and modules. This is one of the strongest things in JEP as I see it. So a page object describes the URL that we are in, how to check that we are at the right place, and the content we wish to interact with, and we can add helper methods to this. So in one phrase, we can actually do domain modeling. So use software-tested principles for this. So this is how a page could look like. So the about page that I just showed you has a static URL that says we're in the /about space. How do I check that? Well, I check that the title of the page is in fact about. And if I want to interact with the header, verify something, then the first HI element 0, I can now reference that as header. In case I change the DOM, I actually paid money to a front-end guy making this look really, really nice, and he changes that from something that is not an H1 element. All I need to do is upgrade the pages, and all of my test cases will still work. Especially pay attention to the content closure in there. We can say required false. If something doesn't show up immediately, or in my example, the to-do list, I may not have to-dos at the very beginning. So I should say it's not necessarily there. It might show up later, or maybe I want to wait for something being displayed in a few seconds. Modules can be used to describe contents that are repeated either on the same page or across pages. So if we're using something across pages, this could typically be a menu bar. If it's a menu bar, I can add a static base that says, well, on all pages, look for it from this reference location, and inside this reference location, find the content that you want to find. So here, I'm finding the link tags that has the text to do or about. The to-do items separately makes a great candidate for a module too. So here, this is the checkbox, the label, and the delete button based on the markup that I have in the application. And I interact with those heavily, so this is a very good candidate for doing it. Then in my to-do page, I can say, well, I have the menu bar module. That's just a module of type menu bar. And the to-do list, here I select out, so how do I grab the to-do items? And those are the ones that are being served as a to-do item module. So I don't have the base of the to-do items there. I select those in the content closure here. So let's try to do this structured a little better than we did before. So now I can just say, go to index page. This reads a lot better than I'm typing in different URLs within my code. Then I can verify that I'm actually there and that the count value is 3. Suddenly, my specification that was really ugly, littered with selectors before, becomes very readable, and any tester would actually understand what happens here. I think my mom would understand what was going on here, and that's a treatment. So, how do I do interactions? Now I can say, the to-do input, add in do this, to-do submit, .click. I could even have put in a submit method into the page that would then say, all right, click on this to-do submit button. Now I wait for the content value to be 4 and make sure that there aren't any of these, or that there are one of these at least. There must be one that has this this item. And I can again verify that the to-do item is, that the input is empty. Oh, that's the wrong one. So let's go back to our standalone example. We can do exactly the same. Here we can say the DuckDuckGo should go into our page, so I don't have to have the URL. I could now switch this out to a different search engine if I wanted to. I can verify that I'm at the right place, and I now can interact with the input field. And here I put in a small helper method. So if I want to do submit, all I do is in the input field, hit enter. So how do I submit is now safely stored inside a page if I want to do multiple searches. The result page is where I now have stored these selectors for the content, and I can now also define the click links. So I just type in a link number, and I'll type the first one if it's 0, and for second one if it's 1, and so forth. Have the GREACH page that just verifies that I'm actually at the GREACH page. I got lazy and didn't type in the entire title. So based on this, I can go to DuckDuck page, type in things in the input field, submit, wait for being at the right place. I have this as a demo, but I'll skip it, so I could have left this one out. Click the very first link and wait for me to be on the GREACH page. Again, this reads a lot better than what it can. So how do we do this with Ratpack? So Jeff just presented us in ways of doing Ratpack, so I hope he's not overly dissatisfied with my way of doing it. So we need to add in the JEP Spark and the Spark framework. Then we should add in some driver for testing. I usually opt for the Firefox driver. It comes right out of the box. You don't have to do anything. I'm going to cover a couple of the other drivers. There's some specifics on those. And I recommend always adding a little Selenium support. If you have to select something in a drop-down box, then that's what supports it. So typically, if something doesn't work out of the box, this is one of the places that I've missed including it. So in Ratpack, you can have the application under test from the Groovy Ratpack main application under test, and you can extract the base URL from that and add it to the browser element. So we have this in the setup method of your Spark specification. From there, you just write your JEP specs. That's all the setup that it takes. In case we want to work with the application, something that is not exposed through the API, for example, verifying that whenever I do something in the UI, that is actually persisted in the database, it could be necessary sometimes. If that's the case, in Ratpack, we compile in a few dependencies to the remote control plugin and the remote in test. That enables me to make a remote control and hand in the application under test in this case. That means I can now, with the remote control, send in a closure of Groovy code, and all it does is it fires this away inside the application and returns the result. This can give us a few problems, especially if the result is not what's it called when you have to try? Serializable. Thank you very much. It must be serializable, but Boolean values, integer values, maps, most of this is. Otherwise, you'll have to implement that yourself. So here, in this case, I verify with the database that I've actually completed this item that I checked up here. You can do the same thing in Grails using JEP. It's just include the correct libraries and include the JEP plugin. You check them with test app functional. Ratpack, it's even easier. You just do Gradle check. So it integrates very nicely with that. In Grails 3, JEP actually comes as the default test framework. It comes in with the HTML unit driver. Previously, it had a comment that says you should exchange this for something more proper. They removed that comment, but I still recommend you to switch it to something different. For example, the Firefox driver. You run those as integration tests in Grails 3, but you do have the option to create functional tests. They'll generate something that looks like this. This actually has a small error. Like I mentioned, we have the title as one of the variables. This works in the HTML unit. You can execute the test and it'll work. If you switch this to the Firefox driver, this test will actually fail. So you can just reference this as a title. You don't have to grab it as a tag. If you want to interact with Grails 2 applications, you can use the remote control plugin, and then it works exactly like in the Ratpack example. You just submit a closure for that. With Grails 3, the Grails application and the JEP script is actually handled by the same JVM, so you don't have to do anything. They run as integration script, and you can just, with new transaction, do whatever you want. You're interacting directly with the application. All right, let's take a look at how we configure stuff and browser support. You should place all your JEP configuration in a file called jepconfig.groovy. Place it in the default package scope. If you put it in a package, it won't work. There's quite a lot of things that you can configure. I'm not going to cover everything, but I'm going to go with the bits and pieces that make sense. So the driver used, first of all. So those are some of the most used drivers: Firefox, Chrome, Explorer, Safari, and the two headless ones, HTML unit at Phantom.js. So those run quite a lot faster, but they're also quite a lot more brittle. So I recommend using Firefox if you have to run it in a CI environment. spin up a headless display, and you can have all the fancy stuff that is brought to you. You can include multiple drivers. If you do a little massaging with Gradle, you can actually have it run multiple different driver implementations right after each other. And there's an example in the JEP repository exactly on doing this. All you need to do is include those drivers and have your JEP script, your Gradle script support this. So for Firefox, if you don't do anything, it just works. So why did I include this huge blob of different configuration? Well, this is because Firefox is the browser to use if you want to test file download. Because in Firefox, you can set a profile, so you can specify where you want your files downloaded to, and especially this one, you can say, don't ever ask, just directly download them to disk. If that's the case, you can test your download, and you can verify that they're the correct files in the correct folders. You can also, by giving it the profile, say, well, I want to maximize this window, or you can set exactly which specifications do you want. You want this to be just a very small window, test this as if it was a mobile app. So those are the options that you can handle in. Chrome is a little faster, but it also requires you to have the downloaded Chrome driver. But it works really well, so I use that quite a lot too. There's three ways you can do this. You can manually download the Chrome driver, install it in your system, and just reference it from a location. That then causes everyone that checks out the project to have the same configuration for this to work. So I prefer a more dynamic approach. One thing is, in JEP config, you can actually just have the Chrome driver downloaded. It just takes a little massaging that you need to figure out what operating system is it. Windows does things significantly different, of course, but it's doable without too much of a hassle. So you can download the driver. I'll make sure this is available. You can also do this using Gradle, and there's an example of that in the JEP repo. So whichever way you prefer, if you want to have it included in your documentation, in your application, or you want to make a Gradle plugin for it, both of these ways are perfectly fine. Again, when you select the Chrome driver, you have an option to do the size and the position. Maybe you want it always to start in your top left corner of your screen and have whatever specific size. Those, of course, you can also type in from your Gradle script if you want to run it multiple times. So I mentioned a few drivers that were available. One of the powerful things when you do CI is you can also use Source Labs or Browser Stack, where you just test it in the cloud. At LEGO we use Source Labs, and there's a Source Labs plugin for it. So first, if you configure JEP config, have to do something like this. Those are set by the plugin based on your Gradle build script. So you apply the JEP Source Labs plugin. It's now available in Maven Central, even though the JEP documentation says you must include a different repo. That's no longer necessary because it's not published there anymore. Include the Source Connect CI source, which is a collection of these Source Lab tools for doing CI integration. When you do that, all you need to do is define a Source Labs closures where you define all the browsers that you want tested. So you just add them down there, including the different capabilities that you want them to. Of course, you should input your username and your API key. If there's, for any reason, you don't want to run this on port 4445, which is the default Source Labs port, you can specify that you should do some different connection. If you run it through a proxy, all of that is available. So pretty neat and easy to set up. All right. A lot of applications nowadays use quite a bit of JavaScript. In case we want to interact with JavaScript, for example, there's something that's not visible, and I don't want to go through an entire list of steps to make it visible. So I pretty much just want to have this displayed. Well, what we can do is with the JavaScript executor, execute some JavaScript. In this case here, I assume that jQuery is available on the page. I select the well component, and I show those that has this class. I think it's a little prettier to wrap this call here in a small JS method and include this on a page that you then extend from JEP spec or JEP reporting spec. If you do that, then you have this available on all your pages, and you can execute JavaScript just by doing something like that. In JEP, you have a shorthand notation for querying on jQuery. I recommend to keep this at an absolute minimum, especially because your users typically won't interact directly with JavaScript on doing that. So don't abuse it. This actually triggers mouse events a little easier than doing JavaScript natively. Some of the pain points in using functional testing is waiting and pausing. So in waiting, you can define the timeouts and the retry intervals in JEP config, and I recommend you to have those specified explicitly, and probably sometimes bumped in case you don't want too many random errors. The add check waiting and base navigator waiting is also two nice properties to add in there. It makes waiting a little easier. In case you make weird stuff like something that fades in a little later on, then you can include the wait for closure. The wait for closure also have one that takes arguments. So this one takes the default arguments from the JEP config in the retry interval and how long do you want to wait for it. But you could say, well, here you could wait up to 30 seconds if you want, or a minute. There is no default way to make a JEP test pause while you inspect the page, but you can do that just by adding in a small JavaScript method that says, wait a second, just pause for a moment. Those comes in different variations. This one is completely stolen from Thomas Lind, who's done some nice blog posts on doing this. But Luke Daly also have some early work on doing this. There is a ticket for this actually being implemented directly into JEP, but we haven't gotten around to that. If you have this available in your test class, all you can do is pause. That generates a small break button up here, and the test will not carry on until you have clicked on this. Be careful when you use continuous integration. If you check in this, your test will fail with a timeout. No one will click that on your server. So, guilty in that one, yes. All right. When it comes to reporting, well, default, the Spock reports are nicely formatted, and you get all the output from the Spock Power asserts. But I strongly recommend you to take a look at the Spock Reports plugin. It has really nice support when we're using JEP test, especially when you write your annotations outside the given, when, then blocks. That means you have some test reports that by default look something like this. Go to index page, when, go to the index URL, then verify 3 items present. I have a lot of management that really likes test reports where they can see, oh, what is actually being done. And this turns out to be very nicely. If there's an error, you get all of the error conditions included, so there's no things lost from switching from the original report. JEP supports us doing screenshots at the beginning and at the end of every test, and if you extend JEP reporting spec, it does that automatically. All you need to do is make sure that the reports directory is set inside jep.config, otherwise it'll fail with an error. A lot of times, I don't really see the issue why we would want to verify how things looked when everything went okay. So recommended setting is report on test failure only, and all the tests that pass it, well, we don't do screenshot there. That speeds up the build significantly. You can do ad hoc screenshots, so if you have a test that somehow managed to cause you problems, you can do the report directory and add the file name. That will save a report in the reports directory, and they're numbered in increasing order. So what else can we use JEB for? Well, we can use it for screen scraping of a site or solving complex problems like 2048. Cedric has done a nice implementation of this. But just to verify that this application has been tested, I'll try to run the scripts that I've shown you through the demo. So this was a Rat Pack application. I've violated a lot of Rat Pack rules by including Gorm from Grails into it. So sorry for doing that, but I needed to see if I could do it. So I added in a pause as the very first thing because sometimes this didn't show up on the right screen. So when I activate this, you see I'm hands-off keyboard, and it managed to test a lot of things without me doing it. So I promised to show you a lot of very, very important solution for using JEB. Courtesy of Cedric, this really helps you if you want to impress friends and co-workers on this small game. It will continue on for hours, and it'll just sum it up exactly how many times that you have solved it. We had a competition going at work where we needed to see, so how many times can you actually go to 2048? And I won that with a screenshot automatically generated by JEB with the landslide. Now I admitted that on camera. All right. So there's a lot of resources out there. Jebish.org is the book of JEB, which is the complete user manual. It's very, very informative. There's a mailing list and a Google group where Martin and others reply extremely fast, so there's help to get. All of the repos are available at github.com/jeb. It also has some nice repos which has features on how to do testing with multiple browsers in Gradle. The 2048 game that I just showed you is available on Cedric's GitHub as a guest. Thomas Lin has done some nice blogs on doing Rails testing in general for an old version. A lot of that included doing JEB tests, and there's a couple of other resources for blogs. All right, I think I'm almost up to the 40 minutes, so this is where I need to ask, are there any questions?
We use JEB currently, and I like it. I have just one thing. When I write the test, I have all my navigators declared in the page.
Yeah.
And then I have to remember, how did I call my navigator? And I was currently switching between, I have like split view, so I see my navigator on the right side and my test on the left side. So are there any IDE integration that the IDE would actually know and allow me to auto-complete it?
None that I have found so far.
Okay.
I do exactly the same as you whenever I have the page defined. The reason I showed you the way not to do it is that's actually the way I start out doing it. So I start out defining my test scenario, and then from there, once I have it working, I export it over to a page and work from there.
Okay.
But yeah, IDE support could be better for pages and modules, clearly.
More questions?
Hi. Do you have any experience with typed pages? So I'm aware you can like force the type of the returns for the helpers and things like that, so the IDE helps you a little more when you are writing the tests. But I don't know if it has any advantage or disadvantage in terms of performance and things like that.
You can define most of what JEB returns is navigator objects, either empty navigator objects or non-empty navigator objects. But there's not really any. you don't get any type safety because it's dynamically declared in the page. So even if you do that, you don't have any support from the editor on accessing those dynamically generated properties.
Thank you.
Hello. When you define a page, you used, well, Gap is using static methods for defining at URL. Do you know the reason? Why do you use static? Why not just use normal method? It seems a bit weird because you can have a page with the normal methods as a normal object orientation, but then suddenly use static methods.
That's a question we should ask on to Luca and Martin. I don't know the argument for doing that.
Have you misused JEP for unit testing JavaScript?
Have I misused it for unit testing JavaScript? Yes, I have. I do just about all browser testing with JEP, and my friend-end developer kills me because every time I do it, he says, you should do that with CarmaScript. And CarmaScript is extremely fast to run. I'm just more comfortable with doing this. So yes, I have. I violate a lot of principles on that one, but I'm not a front-end developer. I admit to that incredibly fast. All right, thank you very much.